I gave 15 years to that company, Maxwell Holt Consulting, mid-tier firm based out of St. Louis, the kind of place where people wore Patagonia vests over dress shirts and called it culture. I started as a junior analyst fresh out of Mizzou and climbed slow, rung by rung. Never flashy, but reliable. The kind of guy they leaned on during tight quarters, tight deadlines, or when someone had to work through Thanksgiving. I'd been promoted to Director of Business Strategy 3 years ago, finally got the corner office. Facing the parking lot, sure, but still, a corner. I thought I'd made it. Not rich, not famous, but respected. Safe. Then he showed up. Marcus Klein, new VP brought in from Chicago to modernize operations. I knew the type. MBA from Northwestern, sharp jawline, too much confidence, fast talk. He shook hands like he was sizing up a competitor. Everyone started calling him the Fixer. Marcus made it clear from day one that he didn't trust legacy leadership. He never said it outright, but you could hear it between the lines. Old guard equals dead weight. I was legacy. I tried to play along at first, give him space, show him I was adaptable. I even laughed at his dumb team-building metaphors. We're not just playing chess, we're rewriting the board. That kind of crap. But the moment I disagreed with his projection model in front of the COO, I was marked. He didn't challenge me in the meeting. He smiled, nodded, but by the end of that week, he'd stripped 2 departments from my purview, reassigned one of my best reports, and made me present my own 5-year plan to a panel that included a junior associate who'd been there 6 months. A test. I passed it, but that didn't matter. What came next was slow erosion. Meetings I was once leading, I was now invited to observe. My budgets got held up in accounting for review. HR called me in to discuss interpersonal concerns that no one would name. I watched a guy 10 years younger than me get promoted to a lateral role and be handed responsibilities that mirrored mine. Just renamed. I tried to talk to Marcus about it directly, but he was always in back-to-backs, or circling back later. One time I actually caught him in the break room and asked if he had a minute. He gave me that corporate smile, the kind where the teeth don't move, and said, "Always got a minute for my team," then proceeded to lecture me on navigating change like I was a college intern. That's when I knew. He was pushing me out. Still, I held on. Part of it was pride, part of it was fear, but mostly, it was because of my daughter. She was heading to NYU in the fall, tuition like a second mortgage. I needed the salary, the health plan. I started documenting everything. Emails, calendar changes, project notes. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but it felt like control, like proof that I hadn't imagined the walls closing in. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Marcus called me into a performance alignment meeting. HR already on Zoom, script in front of them. My position was being restructured, effective immediately. I asked if I could at least say goodbye to my team. He said no. Security walked me out with my name on a box. Getting walked out like that, like I was some kind of liability, burned worse than I expected. I thought I'd be angry, thought I'd storm off and tell them all to go to hell. But it wasn't anger that hit me first. It was shame. Deep, gut-wrenching shame. Like I'd been caught cheating on a test or caught shoplifting in a store I used to work at. I couldn't even look the security guy in the eye as he held the elevator for me. I carried my box. Photos of my daughter, some old project binders, the pen set the team gave me for my 10-year anniversary, and tried not to let my hands shake. They'd done it so clean, so smooth, like it had been rehearsed. Maybe it had. When I got to the parking lot, I sat in my car for over an hour. No music, no calls, just me and the silence and the realization that, at 49, I was unemployed and had no idea what came next. My wife, Julie, took it better than I did. She hugged me, listened, then said something I'll never forget. They can take the job, but they can't take what you built. She wasn't talking about titles or offices. She meant the relationships, the reputation, the real work. And she was right. Over the next few weeks, as I applied for new roles and tried not to drown in imposter syndrome, I started hearing from old colleagues. Some left years ago, some still inside the company, quietly simmering under Marcus's regime. They reached out to check on me, but they also vented about the chaos since my exit, about Marcus's obsession with appearances over substance, about initiatives collapsing because he didn't understand what we actually did. I listened, took notes, patterns started forming. One guy, Jamal, had been a data lead under me. He told me Marcus had pushed a rushed analytics overhaul that resulted in a major client getting fed bad projections. That client, a retail chain, had since paused all contract renewals. Another friend, Clara, from HR, admitted Marcus had created a burn and churn culture that was running good people into the ground. Even legal was frustrated, apparently, because he kept approving partnerships without running full compliance reviews. One night, I found myself up past midnight going over every document I'd saved, emails Marcus had replied to, or ignored, project outlines he'd overwritten, timesheets that didn't add up. I wasn't hunting for revenge, not yet. But I was starting to see a story, one that was bigger than just me. That's when the idea started forming, not revenge in the dramatic sense, but something more surgical, strategic. If I could show the right people what Marcus was really doing, not just say it, but prove it, maybe I could salvage more than just my pride. Maybe I could turn the tables. I didn't want to hurt him for the sake of it. I wanted to hold him accountable. And somewhere deep down, I wanted back in, not just into the industry, but into the conversation, into relevance. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it yet, but I knew where to start. A consulting firm run by one of my former mentors, now contracted by Maxwell Holt's board for executive risk assessments. I made the call the next morning. The firm was called Ashford and Lyle, small but sharp, reputation for quiet turnarounds and brutal honesty. Greg Lyle, one of the founders, had been my boss back when I was still figuring out how to lead a room without tripping over my own slides. He'd left the corporate world to start his own shop about 7 years ago. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when I called, he picked up on the third ring like no time had passed. I told him I had something he needed to see, something about Maxwell Holt's leadership and a risk profile that was getting quietly toxic. He didn't promise anything, just said, "Come by tomorrow. Bring everything." I showed up with 2 binders and a flash drive. I walked him through Marcus's decision trail, how budgets were cut without oversight, how client deliverables slipped under the radar, how employee attrition had doubled since his arrival. Greg asked the right questions. Nothing emotional, just facts. He barely blinked when I showed him the internal slide Marcus presented to the board that used doctored performance metrics. That got his attention. "You sure this is legit?" he asked. I nodded. "It's metadata stamped. I pulled it from the internal server before I was locked out." Greg whistled low. "This isn't just a bad VP. This is exposure." Turns out Ashford and Lyle had been retained by Maxwell Holt's board just a few months prior. Quiet engagement, executive benchmarking, internal culture audits, non-public. The board had seen signs but didn't have the muscle to pull the curtain back. Greg said what I gave him changed the game. He didn't say what they'd do with it, conflict of interest and all, but I knew something was moving behind the scenes. He thanked me, asked if I was open to future project work, then sent me home. I didn't sleep that night, partly from the rush, but mostly from something else. Clarity. For the first time in months, I felt useful. Like I wasn't just licking my wounds, but shaping something real again. A week later, Greg called. Said they had a project for me. Independent contractor, short-term, paid hourly. Can't say who the client is officially, he said, voice dry as ever, but let's just say you're already familiar with the terrain. I accepted. The assignment was clear. Conduct a third-party risk audit on a division I knew all too well, business strategy and operations at Maxwell Holt. It felt strange at first, auditing my own former department, but I wasn't there to settle scores. I kept my tone clinical, professional. I interviewed people anonymously, gathered data, compared pre-Marcus performance benchmarks to current ones. What I found wasn't surprising, but it was damning. Under Marcus, profit growth had plateaued, client satisfaction dropped 12%, and internal surveys, normally brushed under the rug, revealed morale had cratered to red alert levels. People weren't just burned out, they were afraid to speak, afraid to question. The thing about fear-based leadership is it works fast, but it burns out even faster. I packaged everything into a neat, brutal report. No bias, just numbers, trends, patterns. I handed it over to Greg and walked out feeling like I'd just planted a landmine under a glass table. All that was left was to wait for the cracks. The fallout didn't come overnight. Maxwell Holt was still a corporation, and corporations don't crash, they creak, slow and calculated, like they're considering whether it's worth it to flinch. But within a month, I started hearing things. A board meeting had been called with all regional VPS in attendance. Marcus's name came up more than once, and not in a congratulatory way. Clara, still in HR, texted me a single sentence. "Shit's shifting." Then Jamal called. Apparently, Marcus had been pulled from leading several initiatives and replaced with an interim strategic liaison, a title that meant nothing but said everything. It wasn't a full takedown, not yet, but it was a cornered animal losing territory. A few weeks after that, I got an email from the office of the CEO himself, Roger Keane. It was short, polite, and unmistakably deliberate. "We'd like to schedule a confidential conversation regarding strategic oversight. Please advise on availability." I read it 5 times before replying. We scheduled a Zoom call, and sure enough, there was Keane's tired, slightly wary face on screen. He didn't waste time. "We've reviewed the external findings," he said. "We're impressed with your clarity and discretion." I kept my face neutral, nodded. Then he added, "We're considering some restructuring. We'd like to bring in someone who knows the systems, the culture, the history, but who's not tangled in current loyalties." I didn't smile, not outwardly, but my stomach did a slow turn, like it recognized the smell of a home-cooked meal. The role wasn't flashy. Executive transition consultant. But it gave me access. I wasn't technically back at Maxwell Holt, not as an employee, but I was back in. I attended closed-door sessions. I reviewed internal documentation with board-level authority. And most interestingly, I was asked to observe Marcus's performance during an upcoming quarterly planning cycle. It was like watching a man trying to dance on ice. Marcus still wore the same confident smirk, still used the same buzzwords, but the room didn't lean toward him like it used to. People took longer to respond. Some didn't laugh at his jokes. One exec interrupted him mid-slide to question a growth forecast, and when Marcus tried to pivot, I caught Keane watching me instead of him. Eventually, Marcus caught on. After one session, he cornered me in the hallway outside the conference room. "Didn't think I'd see you back here," he said, voice flat. "Guess it's hard to keep a good ghost down." I shrugged, gave him a polite smile. "Just helping where I can." He looked at me like he was trying to solve an equation that wouldn't balance. "You're behind this, aren't you?" he asked. "The sudden audits, the reports, all of it." I didn't answer, just looked at him for a long second and said, "If I were behind anything, Marcus, you wouldn't be standing here asking." "You'd already know." I walked away before he could respond. That silence, that uncertainty, was its own kind of justice. But the final blow wasn't mine to deliver. That came later, and it came from the board. Word circulated quietly. Marcus had been transitioned into a new role, strategic development advisor, reporting to a newly created position, Chief Integration Officer. The CIO would have direct authority over all his initiatives. It was a demotion, a corporate cage, a title with no teeth. And the best part? They offered me the CIO role. I didn't say yes right away. When Keene made the offer, calmly, without ceremony, I just sat there on the video call, staring at the little text box under his name. Chief Integration Officer. On paper, it was a lateral title. In practice, it was a scalpel. I'd have purview over strategic execution across all verticals, including Marcus's turf. He wouldn't report to me directly, corporate optics and all, but I'd control the process, the structure, and the budget. Every slide he built, every initiative he pitched, every deck he polished to perform in front of the board, it'd go through me first. I told Keene I'd think about it. Not because I was hesitant. I already knew I'd take it. But because I needed time to get my head straight, to not just react. I didn't want this to be about revenge. That was too easy, too short-lived. I called Julie, told her what was on the table. She laughed, said, "So, you get to be his boss without being his boss?" That about summed it up. Later that night, I poured a drink, sat on the porch, and thought about everything it took to get here. The nights I couldn't sleep. The anxiety, the shame, the questions about whether I'd ever matter again. And now here I was, not just back, but quietly holding the reins. I accepted the position the next morning. Greg called to congratulate me. "You played it clean," he said. "Not many people could have done that." He was wrong, though. I didn't play it clean out of nobility. I played it clean because I'd seen what happens when you make it personal. Marcus thought power was about control, about dominating a room. I'd learned the hard way it was about leverage, quiet, strategic, and patient. And now I had all three. My first month back was like watching a slow-motion reversal of gravity. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw my weight around. I did the job. I cleaned up bloated budgets, scrapped the nonsense accelerator pods Marcus had championed, reinstated peer reviews that had been conveniently paused. I promoted Jamal to director, brought in Clara as part of a new cultural health initiative. The mood began to shift. You could feel it in the hallways. Less tiptoeing, more straight talk. People were staying later not out of fear, but because they were invested again. Marcus? He kept his title. He kept his suit. But every week, he sat in rooms where I led the agenda. His decks came through my office for sign-off. Sometimes I made edits. Sometimes I sent them back entirely. He never challenged it. He couldn't. The board had made it clear. Alignment with integration strategy is non-negotiable. I watched him shrink, slowly, the way overgrown vines recede once the light changes. He still smiled, still shook hands. But you could see it. The edges of a man who used to run the table and now couldn't even pick the menu. Funny thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, balanced, like I'd finally learned something I should have known all along. The workplace isn't fair, but it is cyclical. Power doesn't last, but integrity does, if you hold on to it, even when no one's watching. 6 months in, I'd settled into the role like it had been mine all along. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not validation, not vengeance. I focused on fixing what I could fix. Culture, systems, people. We launched new mentorship programs for junior analysts, brought in real training for middle managers, and I pushed for transparency in promotions and comp reviews. Things that should have always been in place, but never were because people like Marcus were too busy managing perception instead of people. I made sure no one would go through what I did, watching their career be erased in slow motion while their value was repackaged and handed to someone louder. Marcus, meanwhile, kept showing up. Polished suits, forced confidence, but the truth was in his calendar. Fewer meetings, fewer eyes on him. I assigned him projects with real stakes, ones he couldn't bluff through. He flailed, quietly, privately, and once he even sent me an early draft of a report asking for feedback. It was the closest thing to humility I'd ever seen from him. I gave it honest notes, line by line. No sarcasm, no power plays. Just the same professionalism I expected from anyone. He never thanked me, but the next version was better. That, more than anything, told me he understood. The game had changed. A few months later, I ran into him in the elevator after a quarterly check-in with the board. Just the two of us. He was holding his phone, scrolling through something mindlessly. I nodded. "How's the Westbridge integration going?" I asked casually. He looked up, paused, then said, "Smooth." Clean handoff. Another pause, then, "I know you had a hand in this." He didn't sound accusatory, just tired. "Maybe," I said. "But I didn't pull any strings. I just showed them what was already there." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that says, "Yeah, I know." Then he said, "You're doing good work." That was it. No apology, no peace offering. But in corporate terms, that was as close as it gets to an admission of defeat. That night, I got home late. My daughter was back from college for the weekend, already half asleep on the couch. I kissed Julie on the cheek, loosened my tie, and sat with them in the quiet. No headlines, no LinkedIn announcements. Just peace. The kind you only get after walking through fire with your name intact. I thought about those first days after being fired. How small I felt, how scared. And I thought about that walk to the elevator, the box in my arms, the way no one looked up. They say corporate revenge is best served cold. But I didn't want revenge. Not really. What I wanted, what I earned, was to matter on my terms. To build something that wouldn't vanish the moment someone with a sharper jawline came in swinging. In the end, I didn't need to humiliate Marcus. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to outlast him. And I did.